Hello, everybody. It's Congressman Jamie Raskin from Maryland's beautiful 8th Congressional District, calling out to all my friends in the 8th and across Maryland, and indeed all across America, as we've decided to open this webinar up to federal workers and their friends and families and supporters all over America. It is my on-demand webinar for federal workers in the opening days of the Trump-Musk crisis. We're hearing every day from federal workers who have been harmed and threatened by Trump's lawlessness and recklessness in the first days of his administration. My constituents are appalled and angered and scared by the escalating attacks on the independent professional civil service. And we're going to break down all of the different elements and dimensions of it in this webinar. My district is home to tens of thousands of federal workers who work at everywhere from NIH to NOAA to the DOT to the DOD to NIST, FDA, and other agencies across the government. And these new executive orders and the policies being executed by Trump and Elon Musk are undermining the workplace, work effectiveness, work productivity, and the lives of civil service workers. So we're standing strong with federal workers in our district and across America, and we're doing everything we can to defend the integrity of the civil service. So today I've convened true experts in the field of the federal workforce and the rights of federal workers who are going to share information and resources to help everybody get through the crisis. I'm pleased to be joined by first Doreen Greenwald, who's the president of the National Treasury Employees Union, which has fought hard for a long time for federal workers and has won litigation going all the way up to the Supreme Court. Welcome, Doreen. Rob Shriver, who's the managing director of Civil Service Strong, which is part of the pro-democracy group, Democracy Forward, which is indispensable to these days. Jacqueline Simon is the public policy director for AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. Welcome, Jacqueline. And finally, Dana Gold is the Senior Director of Advocacy and Strategy and the Democracy Protection Initiative at GAP, the Government Accountability Project. I want to thank you all for attending and participating. I want to thank everybody out there for watching the webinar. And I'm pleased to pass it along to our first speaker, Doreen Greenwald. And we're inviting each of them to talk for 3.5 minutes, and then we'll have question and answers and more discussion. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Congressman Raskin, for really being a advocate for federal employees and a vocal voice, shouting out what this horrible events have been over the last 2 weeks. The federal employees I represent in 37 federal agencies were shocked at receiving what was called the fork in the road, a letter that was sent to them directly from a source within OPM. That was unprecedented. Never before had employees received such a letter. It was condescending. It was disrespectful to the service they provide to the American people, and it is deeply concerning to our members. Federal employees, as you know, take an oath to the Constitution. They are proud to deliver services to the American people, and their contributions to this country are being disregarded in a very awful way through this this fork in the road efforts to try and force them to resign their careers. And so we definitely are concerned about this and looking to take whatever actions to protect them.
Terrific. And do you want to say one word of closing about the general advice you're giving to people? And I know others will address this too. But
yes, our advice is do not sign a letter that suggests you should resign your career. They have not. I believe the letters are full of false information. I'm very concerned that, as you know, the government is under a continuing resolution, and that dictates how much funding is available. And there have been promises made to employees as part of this push to get them to resign that I feel like they will not be able to live up to. And resigning your career is a huge decision, and we encourage people not to do that under these false pretenses.
thank you very much, Doreen. Rob, let's turn it over to you.
Thank you, Congressman. Thanks for your steadfast support of federal employees, and thanks to my fellow panelists for joining today. My name is Rob Shriver. As Congressman mentioned, I lead the Civil Service Strong initiative at Democracy Forward. Prior to coming to Democracy Forward, I worked for the last 4 years at OPM, including the last 8 months as the agency's acting director. More than 90% of the American people believe that government employees should be hired and promoted based on merit and not political or ideological loyalty. The actions of the Trump administration in the first few weeks in office have been contrary to this deeply held value. They've politicized the nonpartisan independent federal workforce, and that's going to destroy federal workers' ability to deliver for the American people. These are the workers who protect our national and domestic security, ensure our food and medications are safe, and deliver essential services to people and communities everywhere. There has been a clear strategy to drive out as many expert career civil servants as possible, implement a hiring freeze to block agencies from then backfilling with other career employees, and then surge in as many unqualified, unvetted political loyalists as quickly as possible. So I'm sure you've read about all of these different events and probably have even experienced some of them yourself, from removing members of independent boards and commissions, summarily removing career senior executives, purging career lawyers who worked on cases involving the president himself, placing large swaths of agency personnel on administrative leave on the grounds that they used to work or work now on DEI, expanding the previous Schedule F scheme, compiling lists of employees on probationary periods, taking the federal government back to the 1990s by ordering every federal employee to work in their office 5 days a week. They know this will cause hardship and disruption to federal families, including, for example, military spouses who rely on these flexible work arrangements. So they're doing this to try to get people to resign, and then capped off, as President Greenwald mentioned, by the fork in the road, so-called offer. And it's important to know that this so-called deferred resignation tracks very closely to a similar policy that Elon Musk adopted at Twitter and then was sued over for not living up to his end of the deal. I want to emphasize to everybody that there are folks that are fighting for you and that you have rights in all of these processes. Alongside a broad coalition of civil service institutions and organizations, Democracy Forward launched a coalition called Civil Service Strong. Civil Service Strong was created to stand up for the American people who depend on a federal government powered by a career expert, nonpartisan civil service. Resources to help people to understand the actions the administration has taken and what rights workers have are available at civilservicestrong.org. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you all today, and I'm happy to help answer any questions that
Rob, thank you very much. And I wanted to ask you, as I asked Doreen, I'm going to ask each of the panelists, just in closing, what is the advice you're giving to people on what I call the Godfather offer, the fork in the road? What is your bottom line advice you're sharing?
So my bottom line advice is tread very carefully. These decisions are really important decisions, and people worked hard to get a federal job and to have a federal career, and that should be not discarded lightly. I think there are serious questions about the legal underpinnings of these offers. I think the budgetary issues that Doreen has raised are serious, and I think you need to see the fine print. And when you look at the fine print, you'll see that they are asking you to waive all potential claims you might ever have now or up until September 30th against your agency and the federal government. And I think that's an awful lot to ask people to do for a very uncertain promise.
Right. And even if you agree to, hit reply, resign, that doesn't guarantee that you won't be fired in the next 8 months before September, right? They still theoretically could say, oh, you're a DEI person, or you have worked on January 6 cases. We're going to fire you anyway.
Absolutely. And we have the budget situation to consider. And if they slash the federal budgets the way the Republicans are talking about doing it, who's to say that people that accept this deal aren't going to be the first ones out the door and to be laid off when there's no money to pay for this administrative time off?
All right, Rob, thank you very much for your work and for your presentation. Jacqueline, let us go to you. She is the Public Policy Director at AFGE.
Thank you, Congressman Raskin. I'm a very, very grateful constituent, and I can say that federal employees have no better friend in the U.S. Congress than you, and thank you for holding this webinar. I think that President Greenwald and Rob covered a lot of ground talking about a lot of the different executive orders, but I'll try to focus just on this fork in the road email and what we're telling our members to how to approach it. When it first came out, as President Greenwald said, it was clearly put together rather hastily by people who had no idea what they were doing. They had no idea whether they had the legal authority to make the offers they were making, and I don't think they probably cared. In the days that have followed, when so many questions have been raised, they've issued a few new documents with frequently asked questions and so on and so forth. And we've finally gotten a hold of a sample of the actual resignation agreement that they would have you sign after you reply to their email with the word resign. And this is a sample that they sent to our members in the Environmental Protection Agency. And I'm going to pause there for a minute and say that just as among the many, many problems with that fork in the road email is that they bypassed the union, which is the exclusive representative of our bargaining unit employees, and went directly to the employees themselves without regard to the collective bargaining agreements that are in place or anything else. But we'll put that to the side for a moment. So looking at the sample resignation agreement, you've got this extremely broad waiver of liability for the agency and for the federal government, but not virtually, no similar waiver of responsibility to the employee who's signing. And I think that there's many strong arguments that anybody who signs this would be signing under duress. I've got lawyers around me, and I'm not an attorney, but I think we can talk about this issue of duress for a minute. Within the initial email were numerous threats about the fact that we'll sign this. In the meantime, your job might be eliminated, you might be riffed, any number of things could happen to you in the interim. That we're contemplating. We've got a candidate to be the director of the Office of Management and Budget, who has said numerous times that he'd like to traumatize federal employees, and he wants them to consider themselves villains. We have language like put agencies into the wood chopper. We've had President Trump refer to federal employees as evil. There certainly was imminent harm to the federal employee being threatened in the document, threatened with firing, threatened with RIF. And as Rob referred to the DEIA employees, ordinarily federal employees are only let go for very specific reasons. They engage in misconduct, they have poor performance, the government no longer needs the function to be performed, or there's no budget to pay them. None of those things is true when it comes to the DEI employees. Mm-hmm. And they have not had a normal reduction in force situation for themselves. They've made the competitive area, which is a term that federal employees will be familiar with, DEI offices themselves. So they've deprived these employees of having any other opportunities for federal employment. So we're telling people to think very, very, very carefully about taking on the responsibilities that are given to the employee rather than the employer in these resignation documents. You've got before you several things to consider. You can resign on their terms, completely on their terms. You can quit. Some people can retire. You can wait to get rift, you can stay at a job that you've already been told that the administration wants to make as toxic and difficult for you as they possibly can. Or you can stay and just try to do your job and ignore all this. And a couple of things to consider. If you resign or you quit, you're not eligible for unemployment insurance in most states. If you retire, you're not eligible for unemployment insurance. If you wait to get RIFed, you have a chance, probably, unless you're DEIA, to get another federal job, depending on how circumscribed their competitive area will be for you. But think through all of these things very, very carefully. That's what we ask our members to do. You have a collective bargaining agreement that is in place. It's enforceable no matter what the Trump administration tries to tell you. They just released a memo trying to suggest that certain provisions involving telework were not enforceable. That is not true. Our collective bargaining agreements are legal documents that are enforceable. And if they don't think collective bargaining agreements are enforceable, I don't know why you'd trust them for any other kind of agreement. I don't think that there's anything federal employees can do if they sign these resignation agreements beyond arguing that it was under duress, if they don't fulfill the terms of the agreement that they promised to fulfill. You're simultaneously promising you will not hold them to it, but they'll hold you to it. They won't let you rescind your resignation. All the power's on their side, none on yours. So please beware. Please take a step back. And our advice is don't sign.
All right, Jacqueline, thank you very much. And finally, we come to Dana Gold with the Government Accountability Project.
Thank you so much, Congressman Raskin, and all of you here. I have a slightly different take because when you're a hammer, everything's a nail. And I work for Government Accountability Project, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan public interest organization that for nearly 50 years has worked with federal employees as well as federal contractors and grantees to promote government accountability by protecting whistleblowers, employees of conscience who speak up about wrongdoing, and then we work to make a difference with their information, because federal employees can be the most powerful guardrails against for accountability and against abuses of authority that we have seen repeatedly throughout history. And so a lot of people today have given you a good advice about the fork in the road memo, and there's some other great advice put out by our friends at Protect Democracy today, analyzing many of these points that have been made today that I'll certainly share, and maybe this can be, part of the webinar to share some of that breakdown of the fork in the road memo as well. But to the extent that employees are feeling so much fear, so much confusion, and so much anger, I think, about how they have been treated, talked about, and how their rights have just been mowed over with an intent, a cruel intent. That I have a somewhat different perspective on your only option being to resign or stay, is that you have a right to speak and you have a right to resist. And that is something embedded in our protections for a nonpartisan, apolitical civil service, is that they have speech rights to speak up without suffering retaliation about gross violations of laws, rules, or regulations, gross mismanagement, gross waste of funds, abuse of authority, and a substantial and specific danger to public health and safety. And you have a right to do that free from retaliation. And you also have a right to refuse to obey an illegal order. And so you free from retaliation. That doesn't mean that you won't suffer retaliation, but a right will attach to you if the reason for the harm, for a personal action being taken against you or threatened to be taken against you, in the context of a speech, of whistleblower speech, protected speech, it attaches a right to you to not suffer retaliation for that speech. So you are not completely helpless, even though you might feel so. Now, we know that rights are complicated to enforce, especially in this political environment and in an environment with challenges to all of our institutions. But we do see the power of information and ethical action light a fire that can activate the mechanisms of accountability and democracy through Congress doing oversight, through public interest partners leveraging information, to create accountability, to file lawsuits, to have oversight agencies to the extent that they remain. Take action to address the wrongdoing. And it becomes about the wrongdoing and not about the speaker. And in this case, when employees are so embattled anyway and so fearful, it is wise to consider thinking about exercising your speech rights in the face of illegality, wrongdoing. You also have due process rights, and we can talk about that maybe a little bit later, and Rob can highlight some of those options. But it is not just the fork in the road memo. You have rights to due process, you have rights to speak out, you have rights to resist the face of wrongdoing. And to Rob's point, and to our union friends' point, your CBAs are very important, very, very important right now, because they embed in those collective bargaining agreements prohibited personnel practices, i.e. speech rights, as unfair labor practices. So a way to make sure that if Schedule F and Schedule PC happens and you are reclassified into this policy career, which is also being fought by AFGE and so many other lawsuits fighting against the reclassification, which would strip employees of their rights, your CBA rights retain the remedy for your whistleblower rights, and that those become unfair labor practices that you can enforce through your CBAs. So your unions are very, very important right now to enforce those rights that you have. And your rights otherwise, though, still exist. They still exist. They are on the books. And organizations like mine, Government Accountability Project, whistleblower.org, you can seek free assistance there, and others, and employment lawyers, and so many lawyers around the country are working together to provide resources and legal support to so many of you.
Excellent. But Dana, let me just follow up for a second. I mean, we've got constituents in the 8th District who are being either fired or investigated simply because they worked either as FBI agents or as prosecutors on the January 6th cases. Is there a principle that would allow federal workers to be fired, demoted, involuntarily redesigned, or otherwise disciplined because they accepted a particular work assignment? Is there any precedent for that?
No.
No.
No. So there are two problems. So one, just being terminated without, for cause or any of the reasons that we've talked about, that's a problem. They have appeal rights to the MSPB for removals.
That's what it means to have a civil service, right?
Yes, that is exactly what it means. They are doing their jobs.
They've got to, if they think they've got something against you, they report it. They state specifically what the charges are. You have the chance to answer, to appear before the MSPB, the Merit Systems Production Board, or some other,
Yes.
in the FBI, it's internal agency. I mean, it varies from agency to agency, but the whole point of having an independent civil service is you can't just be fired arbitrarily.
That's right. And in the cases where DOJ employees, FBI or AUSA prosecutors are being targeted because of their work on the 1-6 investigation, very explicitly, they are engaging in duty speech, most likely, that they have a right under the Whistleblower Protection Act, if that is their duty, to investigate, to report illegality, that's essentially what they're doing as investigators, right? They are reporting illegality in the course of investigating the 1-6 attacks, and they have been threatened with reprisal, that they may actually have actionable whistleblower protection claims now because of those threats. It's a higher standard for duty speech, in that they have to show that that the reprisal was because of their speech. But we have pretty clear evidence that they're being literally targeted because of their investigation into the 1-6 assault.
Yeah, let me follow up with this question for everybody. So in some agencies, they're saying you are being sacked because we don't think you can properly follow the direction of Donald Trump or be loyal to Donald Trump. What's wrong with that? That sounds pretty reasonable, right? He's the president. Shouldn't he be able to sack civil servants if he doesn't think they can be loyal to him? I wonder if somebody would give me the legal analysis of that. Rob, if you would.
I'm happy to jump in first, Congressman. No, that's not a basis. Let me back up and first say, um, folks who are following lawful orders from the previous administration were just doing their job, right? And one of the Trump people's biggest complaints about the civil service is whether they're following the Trump administration's orders that are lawful. So how is it that you're concerned about federal employees need to follow lawful orders, and then you're going to punish them from doing exactly that
You
during
want
the
to fire them
previous
for doing their jobs.
You're punishing them for doing their job. And like, what kind of precedent does this set up for our government if every new administration that comes in and is unhappy with policy decisions made under the previous administration not only changes policy direction, but fires everybody who was involved in implementing those policies at the direction of either the political leadership or even Congress?
Why can't he come in and say there's 2 million people here in the civil service, I don't trust them to follow my orders. Some of them may have voted for me, some of them may support it, some may not, but I don't trust any of them. I'm just going to get rid of those 2 million and start over.
So that's not the way the civil service works. Civil servants leave their politics, but when they come into their office, they leave that at home and they do their job to the best of their ability, following the direction day in and day.
Whether they're an air traffic controller or they're a climate researcher, they're a Weather Bureau employee, they work at the FDA on cancer drug protocols. They're just doing their job. And if they're not doing their job, if there's professional poor performance or misconduct, they can be disciplined or removed for that, right?
That's absolutely right. There are procedures for both of those categories, misconduct or performance. These terminations that are happening, they're not based on either of those, right? They're not based on any demonstrated record of bad performance or any specific misconduct. It's political disagreement.
So I want to be clear about this because there's a lot of confusion, especially among politicians. They seem to think that the president could just sack everybody on the suspicion of disloyalty to him. But in fact, the whole reason we have a civil service is precisely so the president can't come in and sack people who are doing scientific research or air traffic controllers or what have you, because they're not there as party employees or as political flunkies, right?
Yeah, this country tried that system back in the 1880s, and it was the spoils system, and it was a miserable failure. The government was racked by corruption. There was constant turnover because jobs were handed out as political favors and weren't based on merit.
Yes. Jacqueline, were you going to add something?
Yeah, I wanted to jump in here, and I'm not going to play devil's advocate, but surely, Congressman Raskin, you have sat through many a hearing where you heard people complain that it's too hard to fire a federal employee. And that is repeated all the time by people in both parties. And it's really what underlies all of this, I think even more so than this idea that people are not adequately loyal to Donald Trump. Of course, the outcome is the same, but there's this belief, it's a false belief, but there is a belief that demonstrating misconduct, demonstrating poor performance is too much of a burden for any federal manager. God, that's just way too hard and takes way too much time. So you have to be able to just trust. And you have to be able to get rid of people very quickly. And they've loosened the standards, at least in the Department of Veterans Affairs, where they have a lower evidentiary standard where, if management accuses you, more or less, you're supposed to believe management. You don't have to have even, there's pressure to lower and lower these evidentiary standards because of all the whining and complaining about how difficult it is to fire a federal employee. And then next to that, of course, is this new unitary executive theory that says the president, the entire executive branch should serve at the pleasure of the president. But the more serious ones, I think that, they've got this idea that, we should be able to trust federal managers, that they would never remove anybody who didn't deserve to be removed. And as you keep saying, and you are exactly right, the requirement that there be cause and evidence of that cause is exactly what the entire merit system rests on. And if we don't have it,
I think we can
We don't have a
debate
civil service.
whether it's too difficult to fire somebody for poor performance or whether it's too difficult to fire somebody for misconduct. But that's not what they're talking about. They're talking about firing people without any demonstration of any performance or any misconduct at all. They want to be able to get rid of people for political reasons. That's the whole reason we have a civil service, right? And
True, but the executive orders, I'm sorry, the executive orders do say, oh, God forbid, we'll never engage in any prohibited personnel practices. No, don't worry about that. If we get rid of people, they need to,
but I've got
leave.
Constituents who've received a memo in the Department of Justice saying they're being fired because they are suspected of not being able to be loyal in the future to the president. And of course, that doesn't deal with job performance and whether or not they're working up to their jobs. And so they've changed the standard. But in any event, it's in the future. It's not even, specific protests about something they've done in the past other than doing their job. But I do think that it's possible that Trump wants to set up an attack on the civil service, which is why they're not paying any attention to the niceties of the civil service requirements. Just like with the inspectors general, very clear statute that we passed in 2022 saying before you fire an IG, you've got to notify Congress 30 days in advance, specifically setting forth the substantive charges against the IG. And they just completely blew that off. But I think they want to argue that all this stuff is unconstitutional. It violates their so-called unitary executive theory that the president controls the jobs, the work, everything that goes on in the executive branch. Well, what could go wrong with that, right? Fortunately, I think that they've already created insuperable obstacles for that argument in court, because whenever Donald Trump is asked about the IGs or the prosecutors being fired, or the FBI agents, he disclaims any responsibility. He says, I don't know anything about it. I don't know what's going on. So it's not as if he's saying, I'm the one doing it. They purport to be acting under the civil service system. But we'll see. I mean, we have a completely compliant and supine Supreme Court that he put in place to destroy Roe versus Wade, but they've been sticking around to give him near monarchical powers. All right, let me just ask you a closing question or two. If somebody, the difficulty in the general advice, of course, is that everybody's situation is different. Some people are of retirement age, some people are not, some people are in a probationary period, some people are not. Some people have reason to fear they might be fired because of their involvement in January 6th investigations, some not. So what is the best place for someone to go to get the kind of in-depth and soulful advice needed? Do they need to go get their own lawyer? Can they talk to the union? Can they go to GAP or Democracy Forward? What is the best way for an individual worker to think about it? Because some of them are asking me, and I know I can't render legal advice in my position. I mean, I can state my understanding of the situation, but I can't do that. So where should they go? I don't know, Doreen, what are you telling people?
So thank you for the question. It does matter. It's very specific in nature about what's going on here. First of all, read very carefully the information that has been given. There are more questions than there are answers here. My take on the question and answers that have been provided thus far from OPM is kind of taking like the top 5 things that people are questioning and then just giving a blanket answer like, don't worry about this. We got you. It's fine. And there's nothing to see here. To me, that's concerning. Ultimately, if you are eligible to retire and you have made that personal decision and you have consulted with somebody who is a specialist in retirement and that works for your family, that is one thing. If you are somebody who is in the middle of your career, that is another thing. And you should seek out that kind of guidance before making any rash decisions. What I tell people is there anything in this deal that is making this a yes for you? And I say deal in parentheses because there's been nothing confirmed. When you look at as Jackie was mentioning, we've seen some of these draft agreements. The agreements don't match what's in the Q&As. and they don't match anything. They don't speak about VERA at all. And we know, even though agencies after the fact requested VERA and OPM has claimed they will approve it, we don't know of any funding that's been made available for that. And so if people are making decisions based on things that are not accounted for, that is not a good decision to make. You should make decisions based on what you know. Again, we know the federal government needs the workers to be able to do the work for the American people. We just saw a terrible tragedy that happened with the plane crash. And immediately what was said is that there were not enough FAA workers. We've seen the federal government looking at hiring incentives to bring employees on because there is a need for a level of skill and experience. It takes years for federal employees to be able to perform the work at an outstanding level for the American people. If you go in a system like this and just replace people at will, you will never have people with that experience level to deliver for the American people. So this, around all of the questions being asked, employees were hired by the federal government because they were needed to deliver the missions of the agencies. That should drive everybody's main issue. And then individually seek out guidance. First, if it's retirement guidance. And second, a lawyer if you are being removed inappropriately based on some other reasons. And always, if you are part of a union, check with your union. They will provide you good information and facts to help make your decision.
Doreen, thank you so much for that extremely important point. But I wonder if 2 million people accepted their Godfather offer and actually said, for the first time in American history, we'll take a 9-month paid vacation where we're told to stay home and not do our work. What would happen to the federal government? It's such an absurd, outlandish offer. And in fact, when people began to raise just your point about air traffic controllers and the FAA, I believe they sent a follow-up memo withdrawing the offers to people at the FAA and who are air traffic controllers. Are we going to have to go agency by agency, department by department to teach Elon Musk and Donald Trump what the federal government does so they can understand that we need these federal workers? I don't know that we need Elon Musk monkeying around, and Donald Trump has never rendered any value, but there are federal workers that the American people depend on all across the country. And air traffic controllers are a great example of that. So look, I want to thank all of you for drawing attention to the fact that this is a crisis in the lives of the federal workers, unnecessarily imposed upon them, but it would be an absolute crisis if they en masse, like sheep, followed this Elon Musk order, which, by the way, is a verbatim transcription of the memo that he sent out when he took over Twitter, with the same subject line, fork in the road. The real fork in the road here, forgive me for waxing political philosophical, my panelists, but the real fork in the road is between democracy and autocratic dictatorship and oligarchy. That's the fork in the road for America. So we stand with the federal workers. We stand with the unions who are defending them. We stand with all of these great civil society groups. And this undoubtedly, unfortunately, will not be the last time that we have to meet in order to express our solidarity with federal workers and also to help give them advice. Thank you all for participating and keep up your great work. Dana, perhaps I could start with you.
Yes, we offer, we have a rapid response intake process. You can reach us at www.whistleblower.org. If we can help you or we know who can, we will help find you those referrals to both private employment lawyers as well as other civil service organizations or society organizations that provide that support. I will point you to a few different awesome resources besides civilservicestrong.org that Rob obviously has stood up for so many of us that are providing resources there. The Partnership for Public Service, they have phenomenal resources and FAQs for public servants, for federal employees, as well as twice weekly webinars they're offering on various questions that federal employees have. And I would note that the Fork in the Road blog post by Protect Democracy, they have a Dear Civil Servant letter that they're sending out every week. And this one has a phenomenal piece on the Fork in the Road analysis that I really recommend everybody go to summarize, capture all the points that have been made here today.
Terrific. And Rob, do you want to add anything to what Dana said?
I think that was a great list from Dana. I would again mention civilservicestrong.org, where we're posting those materials, including, I agree, that excellent Dear Civil Servant letter. And as always, if you're a bargaining unit member, check with your unions, check with your union websites. They're the ones that are providing that representation in the agency to the workforce. So that's a great place to go as well.
Great. Doreen, did you have any other final thoughts on this?
No, I would just thank all of our partners in this. I think it's going to take everybody to break through the noise and get the facts out there for everybody. And we just need to stand strong and keep fighting these attacks. So thank you.
Terrific. And Jacqueline, to you.
The only thing I would add is if you are in a bargaining unit and you are not a member of your union, please join your union. The union is probably the only true line of defense for right now. Your collective bargaining agreement is still in full force, even as they take away rights on other domains. You still have your collective bargaining agreement, and your union will still be able to enforce it. But the bigger we are, the stronger we are. The more people who actually sign up and join and stand up as a union member, the more effective we'll be able to be in protecting you. And if you want to go to AFGE's website, afge.org, we have a toolkit that tries to consider every possible scenario with advice on what to do and how to protect yourself.
All right. The unions will make us strong. Thanks, everybody.